Welcome to Museum Archipelago. I'm Ian Elsner. Museum Archipelago guides you through the rocky landscape of museums. Each episode is rarely longer than 15 minutes. So let's get started. In November 2021, an extremely rare first printing of the U.S. Constitution was available to buy at auction. While the item was special, only 13 copies existed according to the auction house. The bidders were the usual assortment of wealthy individuals.
And now, let's begin the auction. Lot 1787, the Constitution of the United States of America. We'll start the bidding here at $10 million, at $10 million, $11 million, $12 million.
Except for one. Among the individuals trying to buy the Constitution was not an individual at all. It was a new kind of organization, a decentralized autonomous organization, better known as a DAO. This organization, ConstitutionDAO, had formed just a few weeks earlier for this exact purpose, to buy the Constitution. And I remember the memes. Backers of the project posted images of Nicolas Cage in 2004's National Treasure, drawing parallels between his character's fictional theft of the Declaration of Independence and this real-life attempt to purchase the Constitution. In the weeks leading up to the auction, thousands of people contributed money to ConstitutionDAO using the cryptocurrency Ether. That money funded the bid, the amount ConstitutionDAO could pay to try to acquire the Constitution. What the contributors were actually buying was a so-called governance token. Governance rights, the ability to vote on what to do with the Constitution, specifically which museum to send it to, and what text would be displayed next to the document in the gallery.
That ConstitutionDAO is an interesting kind of example of the public claiming back ownership of a document that really should be owned by the public.
This is Nik Honeysett, CEO of the Balboa Park Online Collaborative in San Diego, California.
Hello, my name is Nik Honeysett. I'm CEO of the Balboa Park Online Collaborative, known as BPOC. We are a non-profit technology and strategy company located in San Diego's Balboa Park, which is a cultural park of about 30 institutions. And we provide a range of services on a shared service model. And we also work with museums across the US and outside the US, largely providing digital strategy to help organizations figure out what they should be trying to figure out as we enter a more prevalent digital world.
The genesis of BPOC came in the early 2000s. Because there's such a high density of museum institutions in Balboa Park, museums realized they could pool their resources, and they wouldn't need to start from scratch to build each individual institution's technology stack.
It's a very dense cultural environment. Some of the institutions are actually physically in the same building. There has to be an opportunity for us to do this collaboratively, to create a team of IT professionals that would provide IT support. So essentially a kind of separate IT service department that would serve the institutions, that they would pay for those services. So you are gaining the economy of scale. And so we did a lot of, in the early days, a lot of digitization, collaborative digitization projects. We have a couple of collaborative infrastructure applications like digital asset management. And really the benefit is there's kind of an altruistic need. So the larger institutions are offsetting the costs for some things for the smaller institutions. And we do serve some volunteer-only institutions. And they have access to the same level of IT service and support that the larger ones do.
While BPOC's shared service model pools resources from a lot of different museums, it still operates as a normal organization, with a board of directors and a CEO making decisions and some sort of legal counsel and sustained collaborative relationship with museums. The focus is technology, but the methods are more traditional. ConstitutionDAO, by contrast, was a spontaneous, decentralized effort to acquire a historical document that probably wouldn't have been possible without crypto technology. I've been working on this episode about crypto in museums for years. I recorded this interview with Honeysett in March of 2022, over 2.5 years ago. Most museum people I know are reluctant to talk about crypto for various reasons. Concerns about the massive energy use of some blockchains, how from the outside it looks like a speculative hype cycle, and maybe most importantly, there's a wide cultural gap between the centralization of museum power and the decentralized ideals of blockchain culture. Move fast and break things doesn't sound too appealing if your job is to make sure the ancient vases don't shatter. But I will argue that museums and crypto have some interesting overlaps. Museums and crypto both address the same fundamental issue, trust, and they seek to answer the same question: what happened? Blockchains keep an unchangeable record of what happened, stored not in a warehouse or a data center, but distributed without a point of control or a single point of failure. The first and most famous use for these blockchains is to power cryptocurrencies like Bitcoin, but they can do a lot of things, like, for example, provenance. Provenance is the record of ownership and history of an item, tracking where it has been and who has owned it over time. Right now, institutions like museums and auction houses handle provenance, but maybe there are better ways.
Provenance is extremely important in the museum world, and I think provenance seems to be the ideal application for blockchain. Here is the irrefutable, definitive provenance of this work, and we saw a huge issue with provenance, which is the Nazi era provenance issue, when a lot of works of art disappeared from the record because they were confiscated by the Nazis during World War II. And there's been a lot of research to reestablish the true provenance of works of art and repatriate them in certain circumstances. Collections held in the public trust need to be presented to the public. If you look at what really engages audiences, there are some emerging strategies that think about collection objects as a sequence of experiences. The first experience is it was created. A painting was painted. The second experience is it was maybe shown in a show. The third is that it was sold to its first owner, and then it was transported, and then it was acquired by a museum or whatever it is. So you have these sequences of experiences and the painting interacting with a whole set of things, again, all which happened in a particular sequence.
Of course, somebody still has to write these experiences onto the blockchain as they happen, and museums might be well positioned to do this. But if a future fascist regime steals an object, they would never be able to delete or destroy the record of who previously owned the object, the way they can destroy a museum or its records. We have one more crypto concept to dive into before we can get back to the story of ConstitutionDAO. When ConstitutionDAO pooled resources, the money raised to buy a US Constitution, the idea was to govern the organization using a set of smart contracts, code that runs on a blockchain. And that's why it's different from asking a whole bunch of people to contribute to a bank account that one single person owns. Sure, the owner of the bank account might feel like they should listen to the community of contributors, but nothing is technically stopping them from spending the money however they feel like. Legally, they could face consequences for misusing funds, but that money could still be spent before any legal action takes place. This is much different from a smart contract. You could set up a smart contract that ensures, technically, that the money cannot be spent unless 50% of governance tokens have voted in a certain way. The reason to have this code on a blockchain instead of just somebody's computer is that there's a much greater degree of certainty that the smart contract will be executed correctly when spread across thousands of computers. Someone can't just unplug their computer and the smart contract fails to execute.
You can see parallels in the museum world. A group of museums could come together to purchase a seminal work of art that would guarantee attendance at the blockbuster level, and they would come together, they would purchase it, and then they would share it. So it would be a work of art that would travel. The ConstitutionDAO, ultimately, somebody has to receive that thing. So this group comes together, they pool their resources, they secure ownership of this object, but then someone is responsible for doing something with it. Yes, it's kind of by proxy, so the group will vote what they want to have with it, but at some point it translates to a physical series of actions.
The organizers of ConstitutionDAO said they had interested museums lined up with various proposals on how to store and display the Constitution, including the Smithsonian and the New York Public Library. But they never got the chance. ConstitutionDAO got outbid rather dramatically by hedge fund manager Ken Griffin.
And so part of me wonders, it would have been, as fascinating as it was, it would have been much more fascinating. And I don't know whether the folks behind it were experienced enough to receive something as important as that and what they would be able to do with it.
Right. I think at some point, though, we will actually see that play out. I don't know if it's sometime this year. Some other ConstitutionDAO will pop up for a different historical object. Someone would have to decide, okay, how do we ensure it during transport? And instead of that being a decision made by museums or other institutions familiar with historical stewardship, that might be put to a governance mechanism in the DAO. And then all of a sudden, it would be asking a huge number of people to decide together to come to a consensus about what the best insurance policy is to take out during transport of the object, or however that works.
But and the challenge with that is that governance group needs to be informed. There's a danger of damaging the object if you don't understand what is required in transportation of a extremely valuable work of art. You run the risk of losing it.
I'm kind of curious about how you feel if you were to walk up to an object like a copy of the Constitution and you saw that, okay, this is owned by a collection of people, not necessarily all Americans, but people who are united in their interest in owning a piece of this. But that's the only loose connection. How does that make you feel as a museum visitor?
That's a really good question, because if the public hold museums in the highest regard in terms of trust. They are one of the most trustworthy entities. And if that wasn't the case, if you're looking at an object, I guess it's, as I'm thinking about it, it's no different than a donor who has lent a valuable work of art to the museum. Your interaction with that piece is in the context of the museum with which you hold, high trust and high regard for. So I guess the fact that governing body had determined that the museum was the best place to, albeit temporarily, house that object would make me feel comfortable. To know that something of such foundational historical value is actually in an institution that I know has the highest practices to preserve it.
I'm glad you brought up trust, because that's one of the applications of blockchain in general, is that it allows for various systems to happen in a trustless environment. If the two of us enter into a smart contract, we don't have to trust each other that the money will be distributed according to the terms of the smart contract. We just have to trust that the smart contract itself is trustworthy. And so there's this sort of interesting tension between very trustworthy institutions and then this system which is designed for actors that don't trust each other.
It's interesting to noodle down on that. And so inherently, people trust museums because museums tell them that they're trustworthy, but B, you can experience something and connect with your culture and your past. And there's an implicit understanding that the museum is custodians of this thing and is taking care of them. And they'll see an object that might be hundreds of years old in pristine condition or something like that. It's kind of implied like that.
My theory is that museums have had two overarching eras, the power era and the trust era. As we've discussed in previous episodes of Museum Archipelago, the first public museum that we would recognize as a museum was the British Museum in London, which opened in 1759. The point of the museum was to showcase the power of the British Empire, to indicate that anyone in London could see treasures owned by the most powerful people in faraway places. Slowly and over centuries, perhaps much more recently than we're comfortable with, museums have entered their trust era. Perhaps museums are enjoying peak trust right now. Scandals like museums naming buildings and wings after donations by the Slackler family, as well as the continuing holdover horrors from the time when museums were in their pure power era, like decolonization and repatriation, will slowly erode this trust. And the crypto world has had so many scandals and general confusion that it's certainly not trustworthy.
I think partly for the public to generally accept the trustworthiness of the blockchain, they need to more tangibly experience it. So right now, it's a couple of words and people don't really understand it.
But the difference, I think, is that crypto technologies are built for a trustless world. Maybe if we do start to see declining trust in museums, there's some crossover appeal to bringing these crypto tools like blockchain-based provenance and smart contracts to the museum world.
Museums, they hold collections in the public trust. They are duty bound to be transparent in what they do, but they are clearly not. There is a lot of behind closed doors things going on. That would be a fantastically interesting governance model where everything is completely transparent. If you translate, mission to smart contract. So your mission is actually a smart contract with your community. What is the obligation that you set up in that smart contract that then the public can hold you accountable for? We used to do this exercise with museums and say, demonstrate unequivocally how your mission is being interpreted. Put some hyperlinks on your mission statement to where you've actually done what you said you did. But if that was open and transparent, that your mission was a series of smart contract statements, that would be fascinating.
Immediately after Ken Griffin won the auction, it was announced that this U.S. Constitution would be temporarily loaned to the Crystal Bridges Museum of American Art in Bentonville, Arkansas. It was put on display as part of the We the People, the Radical Notion of Democracy exhibit in July 2022. Since ConstitutionDAO would have also displayed the document in a museum, not so much is different from the outside. ConstitutionDAO made the refunds available for all contributors to claim and disbanded. Sometimes an organization only needs to exist for a short time and just serve a single purpose. Museums should prepare for a world where a group of people leveraging crypto technology can plausibly, and maybe even preferably, do things that were once only possible within museum institutions. There's still a lot of crypto to talk about, and in part 2, we'll dive deeper into the projects that overlap with museums. Until then, this has been Museum Archipelago. The fact that Nicolas Cage featured so prominently in the ConstitutionDAO community shows just how much movies about museums shape museum culture in the real world. That's the premise of this show's bonus podcast, where a special guest and I watch a museum movie and talk about what it means in the context of the wider museum landscape. 2004's National Treasure is one of my favorite episodes of this bonus podcast, and you can access it, along with dozens of other bonus episodes, as part of your free trial by going to jointhemuseum.club and signing up. No, I do not accept crypto payments at this time. For a full transcript of this episode, as well as show notes and links, visit museumarchipelago.com. Thanks for listening. And next time, bring a friend.